Craft. Craft never changes. Welcome to the Metal Crafter. This is the first video of 2024, and today I bring you 3 scenery pieces from Fallout 3. First, I'll build an outhouse that you can find at the Williams Wharf. Then I'll create some concrete mounds from collapsed buildings that you can place anywhere. And last, I'll create some scrap barricades usually found at raiders camps, like the one near the flooded metro entrance. Let's hit the table! The outhouse is a nice and easy to make element, which I think adds some interesting character to your table. I'll mainly use wood and some corrugated cardboard for the tin roof. I started taking some measures using one of the minis for scale and made some blueprints. I usually like to plan in advance and make blueprints not to waste material or gain unnecessary frustration in the process. The structure will have a square base with a couple of low levels of steps, wooden walls, and a leaned tin roof. When using popsicle sticks or stirrers to simulate battered wood planks, especially in buildings, I use my soaking paint technique, which I covered in previous videos. Basically, plunge the sticks into a very diluted mix of black and brown paint, and leave it to absorb the paint for a day or two. This way, the end result looks more natural and the wood grain lines are defined much better. I removed the water excess with some paper towels and leave them to dry. I really like how they look. I did a bunch of them, as I'll use some in other future projects. Then, following the original blueprints, I start cutting all pieces necessary and glue them with the epoxy. Used a small chipboard piece for making the seat and cut a hole in the middle. I prepared a bunch of extra tin planks when I made the grain silos video, so used a leftover for the small roof piece. Cut some indentations on the ends to simulate some further weathering on the tin. To finish the piece, I did some additional painting work. First gave the walls a white dry brush. Used some dark brown wash over the floor. You know what I'm simulating here, right? Then a black wash over the walls, and finally painted the inner surface of the roof with brown to simulate the rust. Then glued it to the main structure. Easy peasy, our outhouse is done. Let's move to the concrete mounds. Collapsed buildings are a common view in Fallout 3's DC area, with a lot of big concrete blocks and smaller pieces that show internal steel bars and beams. As the outdoor Fallout 3 landscape has a greenish tint, I wanted to give the concrete mounds a similar look. I wanted for these builds to be used in any scene, like inside the city or out in the wasteland, so needed to avoid adding bases. As first step, I prepared some bases for building up the mounds that I would be able to remove at the end of the process. Took some MDF pieces and taped some plastic sheets on them. You can also use parchment paper. Then used a main foam leftover piece to wrap other pieces around it and glue them with silicone. then reinforced the pieces with some toothpicks. I added some PVA around the main mound and some flat areas and used some cat litter to depict smaller concrete pieces. Then mixed the cat litter and PVA to create thicker parts. Covered some parts with more diluted PVA and then spread regular sand to add more texture to the concrete. I then changed a bit the steps on the second mound. Instead, I made a water, PVA, and sand mix and then covered all concrete surfaces with the help of a brush. After that, added the PVA and cat litter mix. To make the reinforcing bars, I just used some paper clips. First removed the plastic cover and then twisted the metal. I'll use this same technique to make some barbed wire for the barricades. Took the mounts outside and gave them a black spray of synthetic paint as the base. The foam is not 100% sealed, so I knew some of it might bend or melt, but I thought this would even give the walls and the concrete an additional look. Then went over with a neutral gray heavy dry brush, first with a big brush and then with a smaller one for details and recesses. Then prepared a green wash and went over the entire mound. This looks much brighter at the beginning but then dries much lighter. Just a small tint of the acid rain. Used some bright brown to went over the reinforcing steel bars and added some rust details. Then used some lighter brown to go over them. Used some corrugated cardboard as steel planks. I had some leftovers from the grain silo build. Painted them brown, covered with decoupage glue, and added them between the concrete blocks. As last detail, I have these wood sticks with the perfect shape of construction beams. I cut some pieces and painted them with the same process as the reinforcing bars. Then stick them to the mound and glued with PVA. Cover the entire piece with some diluted decoupage to seal it off, and with this the mount is ready. Finally removed the plastic sheet at the base and cleaned the mound a bit. Used some silicone to strengthen the blocks from the bottom. And painted black a few parts that might be visible when the mound sits at the table. Now, off to the barricades. Taking a look at the game references, these barricades are mainly made of wood. We got some wood beams as main structure and then some wooden planks to cover the front. They also have some steel planks and some car wheels are used to sustain the vertical beams. Some of them also have barbed wires. Started going over some plastic cars leftovers and selecting some wheels to be used. I'll be using the same tinted wood pieces I prepared during the Outhouse build. There's a lot of freedom building these fences. I didn't go with exact measures, roughly built them around 8 cm long and used a mini as reference for defining the height. Used some wood sticks as vertical supports and started gluing pieces of thinner popsicle sticks and stirrers. For some of them, added some car wheels to strengthen the base. I noticed there are some recurrent yellow and gray wooden planks used in these barricades. So I cut a very thin piece of foam and gave it a gray base. Then went over it with some dry yellow and a later dark brownish one. Then cut some rough pieces and glued them to the front of the barricades. Also used other pieces of wood and corrugated cardboard. I wanted for the wood to look battered, so went over some pieces with gray paint, and then gave the entire thing a brownish wash. As previously built for the reinforcing bars, I made some barbed wire with the same technique and added to some of the barricades. Painted them with some brown washes to depict rust. That's it. Let's take a look at the elements in the table. Took me some time to complete these builds, but it was mostly idle time where I, for example, thought on where to get longer steel wires to make the barbed wire. So not much crafting time, but quite some brainstorming time. I also took the time to make some big building remains to cover the back of the table pictures. Going to be using this technique to make further ruined concrete buildings. If you enjoyed the video, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. I've got Facebook and Instagram pages where you can follow for further pictures and announcements. I'll see you in the next craft.